Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou koutoa. A very warm welcome to you all from an extremely and quite oddly balmy evening here in Ōtepoti, Dunedin. Usually the sun doesn't come out to shine here until mid-February, right in time for O Week, orientation week, for the students to come back. But it has come out today, which is just brilliant. And I think it's a really lovely welcome for our guests that we have with us this evening, Professor John Fahey. So kia ora koutou to you all. Ko Marie Tain toka wingama. I'm the Dean and Pro Vice Chancellor for Te Kura Pakahi, the Otago Business School. And it is my absolute pleasure to be able to welcome you here tonight for the first in a series of 3 webinars that we are holding with some very awesome and influential international thought leaders. We are largely holding these webinars as a way of celebrating our MBA, and most specifically our online MBA, which turns 10 this year. Our online MBA is ranked #1 in New Zealand and #1 globally for classroom experience. And tonight we get to experience this firsthand with a world-renowned and experienced academic, consultant, researcher, and teacher, Professor John Fahey. John is a professor of marketing at Limerick University in Ireland and an adjunct professor of marketing at the University of Adelaide in Australia. Professor Fahey is a distinguished research professor with a track record of publishing in marketing and business strategy. Having authored over 100 articles, one of which is the top-selling text, Foundations in Marketing, Professor Fahey has extensive experience and expertise in MBA teaching. And I am thrilled to be able to introduce him as our very first speaker for our Thought Leaders webinar series. Professor Fahey is going to speak to us about marketing effectiveness and getting the most out of your marketing investments. Once he's finished, he is very happy to answer any questions, and indeed, he's actually very happy for you to add any questions that you have to the chat function, and Mina will give us the heads up as we go through, and John will be able to answer them as we go on. So we've also got Mina Mohammed here joining us, and Mina's going to be able to triage some of the questions as we go. And then I'm sure there'll be time for us as well at the end for a bit of a Q&A. So I think that just leaves me to now hand over to John. I'm really excited about this evening, and I'm going to definitely sit back and enjoy this. It's great to be taught to be in that space once again. So kia ora, John. You're really, really welcome to Aotearoa, and it's really, really great to have you here at Otago Whakaihi Waka. So I'm going to hand over to you now, John. Kia ora.
And thank you very much, Marie. And it's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And I'd also like to thank the Business School for inviting me to do this talk. And I guess also particularly to thank everybody who has taken time from the balmy summer's evening to come and listen to what we have to say. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And the purpose of this seminar really is to help people who are making their marketing investments to try to get the most out of them. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at just some of the latest thinking in that particular space. So before we get into that, though, and I'm just going to share my screen here now as well so that you can see what I will be doing. But I know there will be people on the call as well who may not be in a position where they're in charge of marketing budgets, but are just interested in this topic or interested in the topic of marketing generally. So I'm going to keep it a little bit general at the start, and then we'll start to narrow things down as we go on, and we'll look more specifically at trying to get the best value that we possibly can out of the investments that we make. So as Marie said, I come from a little town in the west of Ireland called Limerick. And this is the Limerick Saturday market, which is primarily a market of fresh food and baked goods and fish and all of these types of products. And I typically go there. I guess since I moved to Limerick over 20 years ago, I've probably been a regular customer there, up early on a Saturday morning to go in there. So, why do I do that? And I guess there's several reasons. Probably the initial reasons were around looking for quality produce, and then over time you start to get to know the various vendors. You start to build a little bit of a personal relationship with them. Have a chat every Saturday morning. And then probably even as time goes on a little bit further, part of the rationale for visiting a local farmers market like that is probably to support local industry, or at least to give oneself the feeling of satisfaction that one supports local industry. And the reason that I'm kind of mentioning that story is I want us to think about why we make the buying decisions that we do, and because that brings us into thinking about what is the value that we look for in the consumption decisions we make and in the purchases that we make, and that's something that's of general interest to us all, but I think it also feeds really into some of the thinking about how we should spend our marketing money as well. So, if you look at my kind of three reasons there, I probably started off with a reason that was kind of relatively rational. But as it moved on over time, it probably became something that was a little bit less rational and a little bit more intangible. So, when we think about consumer decisions, we really need to look at what's going on inside our heads. And there's some fantastic research on this over the years. I mean, if anybody is familiar with, say, for example, the work of people like Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize winning economist, you can get we get a really good sense of what enables us to make the kinds of decisions that we make. And Kahneman's and Tversky's work was largely distilled down into the book Thinking Fast and Slow, and he spoke about system one and system two thinking. And what makes us distinctly human is our prefrontal cortex. It's that logical, cognitive part of our brain. And so, for example, if you were ever faced with a decision and you're one of those people that got a pen and paper out and wrote down a pros and cons list, you're engaging in real system two cognitive thinking. But what Kahneman Tversky's work really demonstrated is, even though you might engage in quite a lot of cognitive system two thinking, there was a little part of your brain called the amygdala where all of your more emotional, intuitive type of thinking goes on, and that often kind of overrides the cognitive thinking that we do. So, what that means is that even though we have the capacity to be logical and rational, we don't always use it. In fact, most of the time we're operating in system one mode. We're making relatively quick, unconscious, somewhat emotional decisions. And I think marketers very, very frequently forget that. And they may even doubt it. And so, some of you listening to me might even doubt it. So I'm going to demonstrate to you a choice that you might have to make. And let's see how rational or cognitive you are in the choice. So let's assume you are in the market for a new TV. And I'm going to make this really, really simple for you now. I'm going to just give you 3 price points to choose from. So let's say just imagine a unique scenario where you go to your local Harvey Norman and there's only 3 different TVs here at 3 price points. And that's the choice you're faced with. Now, if I was doing this in front of a classroom full of executives or students, I'd ask for a show of hands. And I can always do it pretty confidently because I know what most people will do is that they will pick the middle number. And maybe that's what you did as well when you looked at those 3. And that's normal. That's what we expect. But what's interesting is, why do we go for the middle number? I mean, what is it that drives most people faced with that type of a choice to pick the middle one? And again, economists will explain what's happening here to us as using the term loss aversion. So when we're looking at making buying decisions, our main concern is not making a bad one. There's a risk with making any buying decision that involves any degree of expenditure. So the reason we tend to pick the middle one is because we we feel that it is the safest decision of the three. If we pay the top number, are we paying too much? If we pay the bottom number, is the quality is good? But the safest one feels like the middle one. And that's a really important phrase, because now we're not engaged in cognitive decision making. We're actually engaged in much more emotional decision making, even though we'll often find plenty of reasons after the fact to rationalize what we've done. The decision's actually been made in quite an intuitive, emotional way. And of course, this leaves consumers very, very easily exposed to exploitation by unscrupulous business people if they need to be. Because if I wanted to extract more of your money, and we were dealing with a product, maybe not like television, where, a TV, where you can obviously maybe price compare with other vendors. But imagine you're looking at the price of a bottle of wine on a menu in a restaurant. It's very easy to manipulate prices. So if I wanted to just simply extract more money from you, all I would do is get rid of that price, put another price in there, and now I've got you making a decision at a different price point. And again, if the next time you're in a restaurant and you're looking at the wine menu, just have a look to see what the most expensive bottle of wine is, because, the restaurant's probably not too worried about it, whether it ever sells the most expensive bottle of wine or not. But it's certainly got a few that'll be close to the most expensive that it will be really interested in selling you. So this type of manipulation of the emotional of the propensity of the customer to make emotional or intuitive decisions happens all the time. So it's, again, just to give you another quick example, take a look at how The Economist framed its proposition to its customers in terms of its subscriptions. So when you look at those three prices, you've got to ask yourself, what are they doing there? So they're offering a web subscription at one price, a print subscription at another price, but then a print and web subscription at the same price as the print subscription. So of course, what's happening here is that what they're trying to do is nudge you towards buying the print and web subscription. And Dan Ariely wrote a great book back in 2008 called Predictably Irrational, where he showed that he put this to the test in MIT, where he worked, and he asked a class of students which option they would most likely take. So when he presented them with this option, 86% of them picked the print and web subscription option, and only 14% picked the web only option. So in the next test, he took out the print subscription option from the middle, and the selection choice with a different class flipped completely, to the point that it was in the region of 60% went for the web subscription and only 40% went for the print and web subscription. So again, what's happening there is a little bit of an exploitation of the way we make decisions. And if you think that that's kind of unusual, just have a look at how the iPhone has priced itself through almost every iteration of phone that it has released. And again, if you look closely at that, what you'll see is that the iPhone 11 Pro is really in there as a dummy variable, as a dummy price proposition to make the iPhone 11 Pro Max look like a better deal. So, this is kind of the nature of how consumers behave, and certainly marketers are well aware of all of that. So just hold all of that in your mind for a moment, and we'll come back to some of those ideas a little bit later on. But I just want to switch gears here now a little bit and just talk about the decisions that people on the other side of the fence, the marketers, have to make. So, every time I meet some managers, I hear comments like this, which are like, should I still advertise on radio? Or we ran a campaign on Facebook and it was really successful. And, every time I get questions like that or hear comments like that, I'm always reminded of this chap. Don't know if anybody recognizes him, but this is John Wanamaker, a famous American retailer. And the person credited with the well-known phrase that half of my advertising is wasted, I just don't know which half. And that's one that, you still hear today. But ironically, that phrase was not invented in this century. In fact, he didn't even say it in the last century. Wanamaker was a retailer back in the 1890s, and that was when he said that. So sometimes it's kind of interesting how much the world changes and almost how little it changes, even though the nature of marketing communications has changed dramatically, as we'll see even in recent years. So what we're going to look at is, why do organizations spend money on advertising? And there really is two primary purposes. So the first one is to build a brand. And so therefore, a lot of the expenditure that you see, which might be, sponsoring a local football team or running an ad campaign on TV, all of these types of spend decisions are generally based upon trying to grow awareness of a brand offering, of a business, of a proposition. And it's a very, very significant part of how money and why money gets spent. And the second one is an area known as performance marketing. So here the advertising spend is really about trying to drive a conversion. So we're not just trying to create awareness here, we're trying to convert a customer and get a sale. So that could be a special offer, it could be a promotion, it could be driving people to a website. So there's what we're looking for is an immediate response. So those are the kind of two main ways in which we think about why organizations spend money on advertising and what the intent behind it is. So when we look at the recent history of advertising, it's really quite interesting. So if we take the year 2000, the year 2000 was really a red letter year in the history of advertising, because that was the year that Google launched their Google Ads platform. So, the internet had been well underway. Google was a well-established search engine. And what was happening around consumer decision making was that consumers were going online and searching. And that became an opportunity then for advertisers to put their proposition in front of consumers who were actually in shopping mode. They were actually searching for something. So it was very attractive. So, when you look at a set of search results, you'll always see two or three, most likely you'll see two or three search ads at the top of the page, and then you'll see the organic results after that. But it was an attractive proposition for advertisers. They were able to advertise while people were looking for a particular product, and also they only paid if people clicked on their actual ad. So this has been an incredible business for Google. If you look at just the shape of the chart alone, you don't need to look at the details, but search advertising is worth $170 billion in 2023 for Google. So it's a huge business for them. 2012, another red letter year, because this is the year that Facebook went public, and they started to really build their advertising business as well. And the real attraction of Facebook's advertising business was targeting. So if you wanted to target, people in the 20 to 25 age group that lived in Otago and liked surfing, well, then you just put ads in front of them on the Facebook pages, on their Facebook pages, essentially. And again, another incredibly successful business here in terms of advertising. So Facebook is currently pulling in around $130 billion on advertising. So what we've seen in the world of advertising is a huge pivot in the last 25 years. So those of you who enjoyed watching Mad Men will be looking at advertising of a different era. which has been replaced by somebody who's probably more like a computer geek, who's spending all their time talking about impressions and click-throughs and cost per clicks and all of that kind of thing. So advertising has changed dramatically. And this chart has again got a lot of detail on it, but I would just draw your attention to just this number up here, which is really quite a staggering number when you think about it, which is essentially telling us that 2/3 of all of the advertising spend globally, so think about all the TV channels, all the print matter, all the cinemas, etc., etc. 2/3 of all advertising goes on digital and social media right now. And that's predominantly two companies, Meta and Google, but obviously there's other biggies in there like Apple and Amazon and others. But it's we've had a huge pivot in that direction in the past 25 years. And the question that we're going to look at today is what have we learned over the last 25 years of advertising and over this big pivot, this big change that we've seen in the last 25 years? And I think the main thing that we've learned is that we have completely overdone it. The amount of spend that has gone into digital media, when we get a chance to reflect on it, has really been overdone, and it's really been unwarranted. So what we're starting to see now, are both in terms of business practice and in the research around all of this stuff, is if you like a real reflection on how have we been doing this and have we been doing it in the most effective way possible. So let's just take a look at a few examples here. So if we look at when we look at the marketing press, it's full of headlines like this. So in the case of Airbnb, we see the headline there. And really what we're talking about here is, Airbnb is an e-commerce business. So your natural inclination is to think that they're a company that would do a lot of advertising online, obviously for people who are looking for accommodation when they travel. But they discovered almost quite by accident, after the pandemic in 2020, travel largely froze for a couple of years. So they pulled back significantly on their performance marketing, on the advertising online to try to drive conversions. Obviously, there was no point in spending money because people weren't traveling. But interestingly enough, visits to their websites didn't fall by any significant amount. So they went, hang on a second, we're spending all of this money on performance marketing, but it's actually really not driving any more business to our website than we would get anyway. So when we talk about Airbnb shifting to effectiveness over efficiency, what we mean is that they realized they were spending a lot of money that really they weren't getting much return on, and that what was actually driving business to their website was brand activity, and they've really shifted their focus to that. So they've spent a lot more money on actually advertising Airbnb on television, an old traditional medium, if you like. And the other main focus that they have really put a lot of effort on is public relations, PR, because Airbnb is rarely out of the news. It's very, very controversial in cities around the world. So they've joined in that conversation, and the number, I think, is roughly like 600,000 PR pieces per year. All of that is what's driving brand awareness of Airbnb and consequently traffic to their website. Adidas is another interesting story of an accidental discovery. So in Latin America, which was a big market for them, they had a problem with Google Ads. So Google Ads weren't working for a while because of a technical issue. And again, they saw very, very little reduction in traffic to their website. So again, they conducted an investigation after that, and realized from that investigation that about 65% of traffic either to their website or to their stores or through their wholesalers had all come from brand activity rather than performance marketing activity. So again, there was a decision made, or a conclusion there, that they had been over investing significantly in digital advertising. ASOS, another business, another e-commerce business. I mean, obviously, if you're an online fashion company, you're going to be spending most of your money on performance marketing. And ASOS, just like a lot of the other players in this space, spending largely 80–90% of their marketing budget was going on performance marketing, on direct conversion activity. But what they were finding, which is why they've had so many financial problems in recent years, is that the cost of converting each incremental customer was rising all the time. So in other words, their cost of customer acquisition was rising. This was getting harder to convert customers. So they've had to relook at that as well, and they've started to consider brand spend as an important thing for them to do as well. And for different reasons, some other large businesses around the world are literally moving away from digital channels, probably the most notable one being Lush. So Lush has just pulled back from social media advertising completely. But this is largely driven by concerns around the lack of content moderation. And, you know, we saw very recently there again where Facebook has suspended its content moderation and kind of followed Twitter or X on its kind of community notes form of content moderation. So again, this is going to be a challenge both for advertisers and for the digital platforms. So I'm just going to get into a little bit of the technicalities here of just understanding why is it that for so many of these businesses, they're starting to see that all of this digital advertising that they've been doing isn't actually working as well as they thought that it was working, given how measurable a lot of digital advertising activity actually is. So there's a few charts here which really demonstrate what's happening. So you've got two lines here. You've got a demand line. So in other words, that's, you know, what is the overall demand in terms of how many people are aware of us and would consider us. So you can kind of take that as a proxy for brand building efforts. And then what are our actual sales? And this is a really interesting chart, particularly if you're a small to medium-sized business or if you're a startup business, because when you start digital advertising, if you have a startup business, if you've just opened a new restaurant and you're building your business, you will probably find that digital advertising is a really highly effective platform for you, because what happens with digital advertising, as we said, is it's very targeted. It's appearing, you know, on your page. It's appearing on a search result when you do a search, and inevitably, you know, there's going to be some people some consumers that you could describe as the low-hanging fruit. So if you're looking for a particular kind of product or service, and suddenly you see an ad for it, you know, that's going to convert you. You're probably going to go and buy that product or service or whatever it was that you were looking for. Because digital advertising is so precise and so targeted, it tends to pick out what the low-hanging fruit is very quickly. So when you see those things like, you know, we ran a Facebook campaign and it grew our sales by 200% in the first 3 weeks, that's because it is really, really good at doing that. But of course, you'll always have some people who are really interested in your product. But then as you've converted all of them, you know, the next level of people will be a little bit less interested, and then the one after that will be a little bit less interested again. So at each time, as you're trying to grow your business, your cost of customer acquisition is going to rise, and the ability of performance marketing to convert new customers will flatten out. It's an inevitable consequence. If only so many people know of you and you convert the really interested ones quickly, as you move along, the less interested ones get harder and harder to convert. And this is the problem that ASOS found themselves in. So it inevitably means that if you only do digital advertising, you will flatline eventually. It's only a question of will it be sooner or will it be later. So what you've got to do is, as well as trying to convert current customers, you've also got to build future demand. So there's, you know, so it's taken us a while to see this, but this is kind of clear and obvious now, that if you want to get that sales line to continue on an upward journey, you've got to grow demand. So you've got to complement all your performance marketing on digital platforms with demand generating brand awareness type of activity as well. The two of them go hand in hand. It can't be one or the other. You're going to have to do both. Otherwise, your sales are going to flatline. And this is it gets into a really important conversation when you're maybe dealing with an organization where there is a very strong financial voice in the room. And I've been in a lot of organizations in the last few years where the chief financial officer can be a very powerful voice in the room. And it's a real problem, because when you look at what happens to stopping brand investment, it's really interesting. So the thing about brand building and awareness building is its effect tends to be lagged. So when you look at what's happening here, what we see is that the brand building line, the orange dotted line, a decision is made at the start of the white box there to cut back on brand building activity. And companies do that all the time. Anytime there's a recession or there's pressure on the business, marketing budgets are often one of the first budgets to get cut. So the budget gets cut. But interestingly, what we see is even when you cut a brand budget, demand does not drop immediately. The demand effect is lagged. So demand tends to hold up even though you've cut the budget. Now, if you're looking at the world of business just through a financial lens, your almost automatic reaction will be, well, why were we wasting money on that brand building activity? When we cut it back, it made no difference to the level of sales. The problem is it's lagged. So you may get away with that you probably will get away with it for 1 year. You may even get away with it for 2 years. But what we see is if you stop advertising, brand building type advertising, for a period of 2 to 3 years, it literally falls off a cliff after that. You just get forgotten about. You're just not known anymore. So you've got to be really, really careful with cutting back on marketing budgets, because you are actually you will have a lagged effect where you won't be seeing the damage that you're doing until it happens really, really quickly, and it'll take a lot of work to rebuild that. So that's why we have these kind of interesting relationships between brand building type activity and performance marketing activity. Now, again, a complex looking chart, but this one demonstrates, I think, in a really powerful way, not only why brand building is important in terms of growing overall demand, but also how brand building can be really powerful in converting and enabling your performance marketing activity, if you like, to work better. So, brief explanation. This is some statistics from the Direct Line insurance company in the UK. So one of the interesting things, I guess, about insurance is that increasingly it has become a decision that people make online. If you want to get car insurance or house insurance, one of the things that you're likely to do is go online, find a price comparison website, put in your details, and the price comparison website spits back some suggestions to you. What's the lowest price? What's the next lowest price? And so on and so forth. Now, Direct Line has two main brands. And when you look at the right-hand side of the chart, as we look at it here, we see that in the period 2008 to 2016, they spent a really high amount of money on building their brand. Building the Churchill brand, but very, very little by comparison on building the Privilege brand. Now, this just shows you the impact of brand strength in terms of online consumer behavior. Because if we come into the middle here and we look at a situation where the price of Privilege and the price of Churchill is exactly the same, we see that the vast majority of consumers will pick Churchill because it's a brand that they know and they're familiar with. When we go this way, it's quite interesting too. Even when Churchill is more expensive than Privilege, people still choose, 1/3 of consumers still choose Churchill. It drops down a little bit more to almost 20% here, and so on. And then look at the other side. Now, if Privilege is more expensive than Churchill, hardly anybody purchases Privilege. That's the importance of brand strength. And brand strength is really significant in driving online conversion. So it's not just about creating future demand, but it also helps your performance marketing activity to actually work better. So to switch back from that and to, so why does that happen? I mean, why is brand so important? Well, it comes back to everything that I was talking about at the start of the webinar about how our decisions are not just logical, rational decisions, and performance marketing, which is, uh, click, land on a website, see a special offer, avail of a special offer. It's quite a rational thing, but an awful lot of our decisions are a lot less rational. And again, we had a super example 4 years ago when the coronavirus hit. The whole question became, is this good or bad for Corona beer? Because a piece of research came out at the time. It was widely publicized on American media and social media, which was something along the lines of 38% of people in a survey had said that they were never going to drink Corona again. Then, of course, and that got, like everything these days, it was a story that lasted for 2 or 3 days and spread like virally right around the internet. The to the credit of the managers in Corona, they just let it run. They didn't try to defend it. They didn't try to change the narrative because I think they saw that this is probably something that wouldn't last. And sure enough, it didn't. And ironically, um, sales of Corona, most sales of beer, obviously in 2020 was off-trade sales, but off-trade sales of Corona in 2020 rose by 40%. So, the coronavirus actually managed to put the Corona brand back into the minds of consumers when they were going to bottle shops to buy beer during the pandemic. So again, the power of the brand and the kind of effect that it has. So we've got a few minutes left in this conversation. So what I'd like to do now is just to go through maybe 3 or 4 suggestions as to what you should do in terms of getting the best value out of your marketing investments, and based upon all of the things that we've been talking about in the webinar so far. So the first thing, and it is absolutely irrelevant what size of a business you are, what kind of an organization you are. It doesn't have to be a commercial organization. It can be a non-commercial organization. You've got to understand what your brand proposition is and tell your story and tell it effectively. So even though the world of advertising has changed, how we spend money on advertising has changed radically. We're still back in those Mad Men days in some ways, where you've got to think about what your story is and how you're going to tell it most effectively. So if you want to be successful, if you want to get the kind of attention you're looking for, you've got to have a compelling proposition. It's more important now than ever because organizational life is more competitive. We live in a more media saturated, marketing saturated world than ever before. So a compelling value proposition is absolutely essential to cut through all of that noise. Number 2, the research tells us that we've got to get our spend balance right. So this is our split between brand building and what's called here by Benet and Field sales activation, what we've been calling in this webinar performance marketing. What we see is if you're an offline brand, you should overweight on brand building over performance marketing or sales activation. But really interestingly, if you're an online brand, if you're a pure e-commerce business, you need to significantly overweight on brand building rather than on sales activation. And this is the lesson that the likes of the Airbnbs and ASOS and lots of other online brands around the world are learning. There needs to be a heavy level of brand recognition because it has the effect of enabling conversions to happen. So, that's when that research first came out, it was quite controversial, but there's a lot of people now who subscribe to it, and it's a very, very common conversation topic among marketing people right now. The third piece of advice I would have for you is to not rely on a single platform, but to use multiple platforms. So some people, for example, particularly small businesses, again, might put all of their money into Facebook advertising or Google Ads. What this piece of research tells us is that if the more platforms you use, and by platforms we mean channels through which you spend your advertising money, the stronger the ROI you will have on your investment. So the percentages at the bottom, this is a number of campaigns that were reviewed by this company down here. So 29% of them used just one channel, 31% used two, and so on. But as you see, the more channels you use, the more platforms you use, the more powerful your ROI will be. So think, and the logic behind this, when you think about it, is really um, uh, kind of easy to get, I guess. Consumers don't spend all their time on Instagram, or they don't spend all their time watching TV. They're in multiple different places, so use multiple different platforms to reach them. And my final piece of advice is to get your platform balance right. So you really need to think about the various options you have as a business. And one of the things, or again, as an organization, doesn't just have to be a business, but one of the things I want to really leave with you, I don't want there to be any misunderstanding about this. Well, I'm not saying don't spend any money on digital and social channels. Um, that's not the message at all. I think the message is get the balance between brand building and performance marketing correct. And remember that digital and social channels can be very, very powerful tools for brand building. So if you're effective in TikTok, if you're effective on Instagram, if you put an awful lot of good content up on YouTube, I mean, all of these things are really important brand building techniques. So it's about really understanding what you're trying to do, and then given the kind of organization you are, whatever kind of organization you are, then make sure you get your platform balance right. And it's a really important decision because we have so many options in front of us now. We have so many different digital platforms and non-digital platforms. So getting that balance right, I think, is really where marketers need to be spending their time and making their decisions. So that's the content of my talk this evening. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully, if you work in marketing, hopefully you got some interesting insights there. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and continue that conversation anytime into the future. And for now, I'm very happy to pause there, and we will take whatever questions you have. So look forward to answering your questions if I can. So I will just I'll just stop sharing the screen here as well.
Thank you so much, John. That was fantastic. So many takeaways right there in the last 45 minutes. Really appreciate it. I wonder if I could maybe jump in with a question before we go and have a look at the chats, just to give people some time to collect their thoughts. And please do share some questions with us using the chat section. Just with your and I think definitely rightly so, point around the really heavy level of brand recognition required as a background behind marketing effectiveness. How does that leave entrepreneurs and new businesses? And where is your recommendations? Where do they differ with more established businesses and entrepreneurial businesses starting out?
Yeah, great question, Mary. I mean, I actually think it is probably easier in some ways for startup businesses now than it's kind of ever been, because because you have so many relatively inexpensive ways to build your brand. So when I mean, it's great. I mean, I've had some students in recent years who are, taking an undergraduate degree, and they have a little e-commerce business going on the side, and their customers are people of a similar age to them, so they know they spend their lives online. So they're creating content and putting content out there in front of people in the platforms that they're in, and even in our business, right, in the university business, marketing departments in universities are realizing if you really want to convert 18, 19, 20-year-olds, you've got to have a TikTok presence. And again, it's relatively easy to create content and put it up there. So you're not trying to have, you don't need a very large budget. You just need a really good strategy. You need a very clear proposition, and you need a creative way to communicate that proposition. And that's challenging because, you know, content online just moves really fast, and its lifetime is really short. But I think for small to medium-sized businesses, it's about trying to, you know, certainly in the first couple of years, it's about trying to create really compelling content and literally build a business one customer at a time.
Yeah. And I
Unless
suppose
unless
that,
unless you're really fortunate and somebody wants to put a lot of capital in, and then you can start doing some other things as well. But you know, I think, yeah, I've seen it. I've seen a lot of small businesses, and you know, of course, you've got to generate sales, right? And as we were saying, performance marketing will enable you to pick off that low hanging fruit and generate those sales. But you've got to be building the brand as well.
is it the same concepts, John, for not-for-profit businesses?
Absolutely, 100%. I've been very fortunate, Marie. I've done some consulting work with some not-for-profits, and for me, the decision has always been around, let's be realistic here. It doesn't, you know. So, for example, one of the organisations I worked with was Cancer Council in South Australia. Um, you know, it's a really important, you know, charity, but so are all the others, and they're all competing for money, for volunteers. So it's a really competitive space. So how can you create a proposition that will encourage me to spend my money with charity number one rather than charity number 35? Because they can all make a good case, but the reality, as you rightly say, is they have to invest in marketing and actually make that proposition. You know, figure out that proposition, and particularly for not-for-profits, they're often faced with the challenge of, you know, do we focus on the positive or the negative? You know, we had great conversations around that. I mean, you know, we've all been affected by cancer in some shape or form. So is our brand proposition going to be a positive one, or is it going to be a negative one? And you know, we see right around the world, lots of not-for-profits having really negative imagery and negative messages, and that's the reality that they're dealing with. But the research would tell you that's not very effective.
Yeah, fantastic. We've got a question here online, John, from Leah. Leah's asking, do the same rules apply to business marketing, and any nuggets of wisdom that you might have in this space? Great question, Leah.
Yeah, great question. And the answer, absolutely the same rules apply. And it's, you know, a lot of the time when we talk about brand building, we almost implicitly think consumer brands, you know, the Coca-Colas and you know, BMWs and all these brands that we all know about. But in the world of business to business, brand is incredibly important as well. And we see that more and more. And it's not today or yesterday. I mean, you know, I've been in this business for a while, right? And you know, back in the day, you know, IBM ran a campaign where, you know, their proposition was nobody got fired for recommending IBM. So they're talking about the brand. They're providing that emotional reassurance that they're a good brand, they're a safe brand. So the idea is just the same. You've got to again tell your story. You've got to provide a compelling story. And I think for B2B brands, there is also the idea that the internal and external story can align really well. So let's say you're working in the area of medtech. You know, your customers are physicians and the healthcare sector, but your internal people, you know, can really feel reassured that the work they do is contributing to the health of the population around the world. So there's a really powerful story that you can tell there, which can be both internal and external. And yeah, while I think a lot of marketing spend in the B2B space might go directly through the sales force, you know, all the sales force will tell you that conversions are easier for them if there's a strong brand behind them.
Thank you. And thank you for that question, Leah. And anyone else, please do jump on in with your questions. I've got one here from Elizabeth. John, do you think newspapers' advertising income and reputation for effectiveness will recover with this new knowledge?
Yeah, that's another great
How are they
question.
going to how are they going to fare?
These are the ones where we're looking into the future, right?
The million-dollar question.
Yeah, well, I think the prospects for newspapers are not great. I think the way consumption of news is going, newspapers are becoming more of a niche product. So while they can be, but if you look actually, and it's really interesting to look at actually, when you think about newspaper advertising, quite a lot of newspaper advertising is of the conversion type variety, so you'll see an ad for, to go back to our friends Harvey Norman, and there's a whole bunch of price points there. So they're not really trying to build a band. They're trying to convert you. And one of the interesting problems actually for newspapers was the decline of classified advertising, which is classic kind of conversion advertising. Once because the classified pages in newspapers were by far the most profitable pages. So they have, the problem for newspapers is they have lost a lot of advertising, and they've also lost a lot of, dare I use that awful jargonistic expression, of eyeballs. There's not that many people buying or reading newspapers anymore. So therefore, I think the future is not bright for that medium, because consumers are consuming their news in different ways. I mean, there are interesting statistics coming out of the UK, for example, which, this is kind of scary in some ways, which I can't remember the exact percentage, but it was in the region of 50% of kids under 16 were consuming their news through TikTok. So, that's kind of the direction that we're heading in. So while there is a swing back to brand building, whether it will bring newspapers with it, I think if I was to make a punt at this, I think that's unlikely.
Yeah, though we're not too sure about the bright future that this may hold. Any last sort of final tips that you might want to give us before we sign off, John? Any
The
tips for the
tips.
future?
Yeah, look, I think we have, we're learning all the time, Mary, and I think the speed of change in this sector is really interesting. So while we've seen a big shift in the last couple of years, there's going to be more coming. So I think it's really stay on top of it. Keep looking at what's happening. New platforms are going to come and go. It's going to be an interesting future, with TikTok, for example, which has been kind of the flavor of the month platform in recent years. Whatever happens with that, particularly in the US. So yeah, look, I think it's going to be really exciting, and hopefully there's ideas in there, and that will also kind of encourage people to look a little bit more into their own behavior as well, because we're all consumers too, and I think learning about how we make decisions and how marketers try to nudge our decisions a little bit is a fascinating area. So there's going to be loads to learn.
I think it's extremely important in this current climate to think about how we are spending our very increasingly limited resources.
Yeah.
So I would really like to thank you for the tips that you've given everyone on what you need to consider around spending wisely. I'm going to leave the final thanks to Leo Lee, who has just posted a little thank you here, really appreciating your knowledge and the time you've spent with us. And thank you for visiting Ōtepoti, Dunedin. I would really like to warmly thank you, John, for coming to Otago Whakaihuaka. I know that this is the 4th year that you have taught with and on the MBA program for us, and we hugely appreciate appreciate your time, your expertise, and the experience that you share with us. It's just brilliant to have you here. And then for you to also give your time freely as well to our public, our alumni, and our guests who have been able to join us either live tonight or who will watch this in the future, and maybe even watching it and letting us know if your predictions have come true. So really hugely appreciate your time and effort, John. Thank you so much. So just a reminder to everybody who's either listening now or tomorrow or the next day, this is the first in 3 of Thought Leaders webinar series that we're holding. Special celebration that we're having for our 10-year online MBA anniversary, which is this year. Please join us next week, the same time, 7 p.m. Next Monday evening, and we've got Emeritus Professor Brendan Gray joining us, and he's going to give us his views on the future of the MBA, which I'm very much looking forward to joining, and I hope many of you can make it with us as well next week. So that just leaves me to warmly thank John once again, and to thank you all very, very much for joining us. Ka kite and good night. And thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Marie. It's been a real pleasure.
Good night, everyone.